Men of Iron, a short story written by Amy Boucher and read by Owen Staton. As far as I knew, it had always been there, that lingering monolith of cold iron holding up the concrete sky. I thought it must have been put there by giants, for they were common round here. Wasn't it that mean owd soul Gwendol, who carved through the land and left the wrecking? There was even a battle once between them, out in the hills somewhere I'd never been, but heard of in my grandfather's stories. Perhaps the king of the giants had ordered it for safe passage across the river. But alas, whenever I asked my grandfather, he would smile, shake his head and say, "No, love, this was built by people like you and I, men of the gorge, common folk, and they poured their heart and soul into it. It may be iron, but it is blood and sweat and tears that kept it standing. If you look closely, you might be able to see some of them still, for they're still here." So often I would watch the riverbanks, desperate for a glimpse of those clever men, but I would never see them. The disappointment would spur my butterfly mind into action, and I would ask all sorts of questions whilst we walked the green roads up to paradise. Were they rich, those men of iron? Did they get all sorts of important books written about them? Did they each get letters from the king and queen? I would spill the contents of my head out, and my grandfather would listen, humoured by the simplicity of my questions. Then after a while he would smile and reply, "No, my love, rich folk don't remember those men. They're ghosts to them. That's why we have to remember. That's why we have to celebrate them." Then he would begin to tell more stories from beyond the gorge, of horse-headed spirits and fighting monks, witches, and fields where fairies played. I never wanted those stories to end. Even the frightening ones felt to me like fireworks, lighting up my mind. I felt as if I was being told secret things, of Old Scratch and his wicked games. Did you know he went for a drink in an alehouse once, down in Jackfield? The Boat Inn, that's the name. He played cards with the locals, promised them all sorts, only to leave the place on a big gust of wind, laughing and spitting curses as he went. These were the stories that mattered, that added colour and depth to my known world. There was one thing that my grandfather never mentioned, a threatening too awful to speak of. Of course, I'd heard whispers of it. The older children would only mention it when they thought the adults were busy and unable to chastise them for such speak. The ghost Barge. Even the name made my bones shake. It was said to sail down the river through green and under iron before disappearing. Some said it was searching for bodies, for wicked folk to claim. That's why I always said my prayers and did what my mother told me. It wouldn't get me. I'd put up a fight. You know, Billy Evans said that his father had seen it, the barge, and that's what sent him strange. He was walking back from the foundry late, and it scared him so much that he lost his speech and senses. I dunna know how true that was, but what I do know is that it terrified me. I never understood why the iron folk let it sail that way past them. Were they not protecting their creation? Often, When things were quiet, I would sit in the garden between the potato patch and the beans and look out over the green sea. I could just make out the tiny paths and roads that ran like veins and capillaries through the gorge, the remains of lime kilns and blast furnaces, scars now on an otherwise pretty landscape. I knew little of life away from this place. I knew there were some places built from thick concrete, cluttering the sky with buildings. Martha had told me that her aunt lived somewhere like that. But I did not like the sound of that much. No, I would rather stick to my gorge and my stories. "Your head's in the cloud," my mother would say, whenever I began talking of such things, and grandfather would smirk and say, "Dunna pither there, inna something wrong with that," and wink at me. He had this voice that filled the room, and a warmth deeper than any furnace. He reminded me of an oud oak, unwavering, sturdy, and ever-present. He was always helping out where he could, especially since father was gone. He tended to the bees, and took my brothers out into the woods to bring back pheasant and rabbit. Though I shouldn't be talking of that. He did his fair share of raising them, and God knows they needed him. But he saved the stories for me. Every Sunday we would go for a walk, and he would share with me a lifetime of tales. Sometimes it was the tales of kings. Oh, they'd all come here, you know. They used to hunt in the woods by the Wreckin. Other times he would tell me of ghosts. He'd even seen a few in his lifetime. The spirit of that old grain wench that wanders around Madeley, and the phantom monks of Buildwas Abbey. I liked them ruins. He'd taken me there once or twice. It seemed like the past and the present crashed down around the place, creating a sort of continuity, a stillness. Sometimes he'd talk of his own grandfather, a barrel-chested man who bare-knuckle fought and played the fiddle. He'd been a Welshman. His father had a friend that built coracles and tamed foxes. They'd walk right up to him and start acting like a dog. He would talk fondly of his mother, who worked at the China works all her life and could paint the most delicate little flowers. Whenever he spoke of them, they felt alive, as though they walked besides me. Though I was a solitary thing, I have to say, I never felt alone. That was until one blustery day, when the leaves fell like raindrops, leaving the whole area cold and silent. As soon as I woke up, I knew it. There was a silence that told me, for that was one thing our house never was. The cock didn't crow, and nothing could be heard. The atmosphere felt like a prolonged sigh. I will never forget that silence, creeping along the rock and darkening our hearts like pitch. He was gone. I would have to tell the stories now. The next few days passed like a haze, and were filled with tears, tantrums, and black cloth. The day of the funeral, we took him on his final journey down the green roads from paradise. The concrete sky became a corpse road across the Severn. We paused for a moment on the bridge, and that is when I saw them, lining the riverbank with their heads bowed, scrunching their hats in their hands. The men who built this bridge and the gorge now stood paying their respects. They'd come to remember him. I couldn't help but smile at that fact. Perhaps he would join them now. His spirit was free. Perhaps he would become one of the guardians. It was but a brief apparition, for soon they faded, leaving the same emptiness I was becoming accustomed to. Mother's face was full of salt, and I squeezed her hand tighter to show her I was there. My brothers walked beside me, choking back tears. They looked like poor baby birds, cooing and searching for their mamma. I wanted to help them, but my grief was everywhere. It was a shadow covering the whole gorge. I don't know what made me turn around and take one last look at the river, but when I did, I saw it. The ghost barge. A gasp escaped my lungs, and my blood ran cold as I locked eyes with the bargeman, peering through his tattered shroud. But his gaze was not cold, nor was it cruel. There was kindness in his pale, sunken face and dark eyes. Quickly I understood. That old bargeman wasn't bad. No, really. No, he was helping them. He was taking them on their journey.